There are certain marked features which are known as the characteristic features, which makes American poetry quite different from British poetry because of the geographical terrain, because of the cultural values, because of the mentality. There are many factors which contribute to the difference and similarity between American and British poetry. Let's learn them. Now, the first one is colonial and early American poetry. We need to learn that first that America was also one of the colonies of the Britisher, and and during the earlier period when the poems were written during in America, they were chiefly the poems of religious values, and they are contemplative. They are deep meditation or speculation about or something which is related with God, death, and all these things were prominent during that particular era. And the major poet of this particular time were Anne Bradstreet and Edward Taylor. Next factor or next point which makes American poetry different from British poetry is that 19th century romanticism. 19th century, as we know, that in British poetry it was a period of romanticism, and America was a country which was a kind of a tailor made for romanticism because of the wild rich terrain. The geographical terrain was nature, it was America has a wild landscape, and this wilderness is a kind of a added advantage to America for romanticism, and it celebrated individualism and nature and common people. That the themes which are particularly, or the aspects which are particular there in the romantic poetry, romanticism, they are a kind of a natural to America. The prominent poet of this particular time, or the poets whose poetry define these features, are Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman. Poe is a poet, or is a writer also, who was completely interested in the dark aspect, the mysterious aspect of nature, and in his poem we find all these aspects. Emily Dickinson, her poem, or she is considered to be the one who is being obsessed with the theme of death, nature, and the mind. Whitman celebrated individualism, nature, and common people, and particularly in in his poem "Song of Myself" is a clear example of the celebration of individualism. The next aspect is transcendentalism. This movement, as we know, is a movement which emphasizes on the point, or on the idea of intuition, spirituality, and the connection between human and nature. There is a kind of a linkage which we in this particular time period of climate crisis, we feel that man has been completely alienated from nature. But during that particular time, when nature, and there was a kind of an harmony between nature and human being, that aspect was being celebrated, and that phenomenon was also known as transcendentalism. This idea was also there in the British poetry, particularly in the writer like Shelley, who also proposed the idea of pantheism. Now we find that same similar aspect in the works of writers such as Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. These two writers, particularly Ralph Waldo Emerson, he has elaborated on this idea of transcendentalism, and the poetry, particularly Henry David Thoreau, who also lived in the woods, and he enjoyed living there, and he composed some of his finest poem living there. And their work often contain these ideas. Next is Harlem Renaissance. In the early 20th century, the Harlem Renaissance brought about a flourishing of African American art, including poetry. As we know that America was the colony, so African were brought as a slave to American continent, to America and the continent of America, and these the later generation who acquired education and who were able to write, they wrote about the experience and the racial discrimination and inequality which they experienced, or their earlier generation meted out this type of experience and observation. They try to present. they tried to present, and they have been working on that line also still in the present time also, about all these issues. So that was a very important period of American poetry. And the writer, particularly Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, they addressed these issues. Now, there is another aspect, that is modernism. As we know that modernism was also was a time period where there was a kind of a great political turmoil. The two world wars were there, and as a result of that, there is a kind of a period of uncertainty, and there was a kind of an tumultuous period. And this tumultuous period was also reflected in the writing of writers such as T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. Their poetry become a kind of an intellectual exercise to the reader. Rather than simply enjoying the poetry, the reader has to strain their nerves to understand their poems. There was also a kind of an uncertainty that they depict in their poems. Now, as another aspect of American poetry is confessional poetry, which we witness in the writings of Sylvia Plath and Al Sexton. These writers particularly expressed their personal feelings, their personal emotion. Particularly, if we talk about Sylvia Plath, her poem "Daddy" reflects her psyche. And there is another aspect, that is beat generation. Beat generation include the poets such as Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. They are a kind of a writer who rebelled against the mainstream society. This I mean, beat generation movement is also somewhat related with the kitchen sink drama or angry young movement or angry man in India type of things were there. So these writers and the poets, they actually challenged, they caution about what are the norms prevalent during that particular time in the society, and they explored other themes, that is spontaneity, spirituality, and counterculture. This is very important to learn about that. And then we have contemporary poetry, that is the present time poetry, and it is I mean, a very rich literature of America, and that because it has wonderful varieties and different voices are coming there, and these writers have explored so many themes, the day-to-day experience, and uh, they even experimented with the various forms of poem. For example, the sonnet, the ghazal, the tanka, the haiku, the saranyu, and even the traditional meters, and even the for example the blank verse, the villanelle, and all the aspects of poems they have explored and experimented and enriched with their writing. Particularly if we talk about Billy Collins, his writings are humorous, but the reader cannot go without falling in love with the writing of these writers, Billy Collins, Natasha Threatway, Rita Dev. These writers have gained recognition by their unique work and style in writing. Spoken word poetry. In the recent year, American poetry has witnessed spoken word poetry that has gained popularity, particularly in the works of writers such as Sarah Kay, Rudy Francisco, and also, if I talk about the present one, Rupi Kaur. She has been going across the globe to give her poetic performances. And these are also helping the writers to gain name, fame. And next is the social and political theme. Many contemporary poets now are engaging with the political issues and social issues, and I, addressing the topic of, for example, gender inequality, particularly in the work of Adam Rich, and even the racial problem, for example, in the works of Audre Lorde, or environmental concerns such as Gary Snyder and Mary Oliver. So these writers are addressing various issues about the society. They are challenging them. And next one is free verse and formal poetry. American poet, particularly Walt Whitman, is considered to be the proponent and of this particular form of poetry, and he has popularized this form of poetry, that is writing without having any kind of a fixed meter of poem, and that is a free verse writing. And not only that, but there is a kind of an experimentation with the formal poetry, for example the sonnet and other form. And this has helped in evolving the poetic form that we are now knowing as American poetry. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you.